Grading the grid. Now, as we've said a couple of times, we are at a neat part in the season where 12 races under our belt, 12 races still to go. And because of this break between the British GP and the Belgian GP, it gives us a bit of time to evaluate how the drivers are doing so far this season. Let's start with the man who, a bit of a groundbreaking move this season to Ferrari, that being Lewis Hamilton. Has a sprint win under his belt earlier on in the season at the Chinese GP. Outside of that, has struggled to find the podium. It's been a difficult one for him in that respect. What would you grade him?
Yeah, I actually found a lot of these really tricky, and Hamilton's was one of those that was especially tricky. The Ferrari has been up and down in form. Of course, you have to compare to his teammate, whereas Leclerc now has a handful of podiums. Hamilton doesn't have any yet. A couple of fourth places, though, have done really, really well. And when he has become one with the car, you can still see that he's got that old pace. It's definitely still there. Out-qualified by Leclerc more often than not, though, but the sprint wing showed that he could pull a result out of the bag if the conditions really come through. I've gone with a C+ for Lewis Hamilton. I think this has been a good, not great start to his Ferrari career. And part of that I put down to the Ferrari. It's clearly not the machine he wants it to be. He's clearly there for next season rather than this season. I'm sure Leclerc is thinking the same thing. But more often than not, he's been slightly off the pace than what I have wanted from Leclerc. But he's not embarrassed himself. There's not been any moments where I realistically think, crikey, you are so bad in comparison to Leclerc, which there's a risk, right? Leclerc is that good. There is a risk that could happen right now where they are in their careers, respectively. So for me, on the area on the better side of good, it's a C+.
British bias. I've gone with a C. We are way out from one another. Yeah, I agree with your assessment on this. I think the Chinese sprint promised a little bit more than what has delivered, given how early in the season that was and how early into his stint at Ferrari it was. And it's not like that Chinese sprint, he got the result through some lucky safety car or some weird situation with weather or anything like that. He had another good result later in the season, another sprint, the Miami sprint. But even though that was a good performance, that was, if you remember, there was a pit stop in a sprint race, which was weird, and you had to be on the right tyre at the right time. And for whatever reason, Ferrari actually did something good that day. But that Chinese sprint win was just, he was the best driver from start to finish. So the fact that he hasn't been able to build on that has been disappointing. I don't know if you agree with this. There haven't been that many lows, but just not many highs either.
This is exactly why I went for a C+, because the lows are just pure mediocre. They're just average, and that's the Cs. But he's had a couple of really good moments. The 2 4th places, the sprint win, the Miami performance I thought was good, as you mentioned. So that's what bumps it up slightly for me. Nothing is embarrassing. You know, he hit Mercedes last season. He had a couple of, Q2 knockouts, Q3 knockouts, Q1 knockouts rather. Russell was kind of trouncing him. They're still really close as teammates. It's still a very close race. I know Leclerc is statistically above, but I don't think it's been that different. So it's been solid.
He's done all right to stay in the mix with Leclerc, really, given he's only beaten Leclerc, I think, twice all year. And yet you look at the standing in normal races, obviously the sprint races, he's got a couple of situations where he's beaten Leclerc there. But he's only 16 points behind. He's only one position behind. He's not distant from his teammate. So there's still plenty to work with. I agree with what you said earlier about how it's not really about this year. And he has said a few times he can't wait to, I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but have something to do with the DNA of next year's car, the ex-DNA of next year's car, you might say.
No.
Well, I'm just naming an unrelated rapper that has nothing to do with Lewis Hamilton.
A very talented pianist, and that is all.
Yes. But yeah, I was sort of, when I was reflecting on his season, it was a case of what's been his worst race? And there's not actually been that many out and out poor races from him. But then you look at, well, what's his best race? You could pick the 4th place finish at Austria when he was double digit seconds behind his teammate, or the 4th place finish at Silverstone where he couldn't beat Sauber to the podium. I'm not saying like those were awful results, but equally, if those are your best results, it hasn't been a great year. So that's why I went for C. What about Alex Albon? He's our Williams representative on today's episode. Obviously doing quite well in the midfield. You could call him the leader of Formula 1.5 or whatever that is these days. What are you grading him?
I'm giving Albon a B. Albongo. That's how we spell it now. Lowercase A-L, uppercase B for Bono. I think he's had a really strong season, but I think Williams have been through some tumultuous times towards the back end of, the second quarter of this season, I shall phrase it. The Williams seem to really sink in quality over the last 4 or 5 Grand Prix. Basically, since we hit Spain, it's felt like that car has struggled to really run with good form. They've had some DNFs. A lot of them weren't their fault. Alex Albon has put himself into trouble a little bit, but regularly when the car is allowing him to, he's qualifying at the top end of Q2, occasionally into Q3. He's been getting himself into points when we had that stretch of top 5 or 6 finishes. I think it was 4 or 5 in a row, which in that Williams was fantastically well done. Whilst Carlos Sainz has also been in the wars, I think Albon has definitely had the better of things there at Williams, and he's scored regularly good points. So overall, I have been really impressed with Albon. I think he's stepped up higher than I thought he would. He's outdriven Carlos Sainz in a number of ways that I wasn't expecting him to. And he's adapted well to the Williams being a far more competitive car. There's a few areas I'd like to see him improve. I do think that occasionally he's misqualifying potential. And I do think that he has caused incidents himself as well. The one in Spain, I think it was, with Lawson when the car was also not doing too well, was partially on his fault. And that's why it's dropped down slightly. But like a B is one of my highest scores that you'll see today. And I do think that Albon overall has like a really strong first half of this season.
Yeah, I've gone with a B+. I wasn't a million miles off an A-. And I think if that run of retirements he's had quite recently, probably more on the car than it is him. But if he'd had the chance to maybe, like Austria, for example, he was in a fairly good spot there. If he was able to convert on that, then maybe I would have stuck with an A-. He has been able to convert some really good positions. Like he's had 3 top 5 finishes, which by itself is very impressive. But if he had not scored another point outside of those 3 top 5 finishes, that would be enough to beat everyone in the midfield apart from Hulkenberg. Like every single other driver.
Well, that's so funny.
Well,
I love that it's Hulkenberg. That's the person that we're comparing this to in that style, but that's just so funny.
He's done a very good job. And he's also on top of those 5th place finishes, 2 of which were back to back with the Miami and Imola results. Both of those were really impressive. Of course, Miami, he was competing with the Ferraris and beating the Ferraris. And Imola, I know the strategy went right that day, but he really converted on it. He's also had some 7th, 8ths and 9ths. And that's, those will add up over time. And the championship standings tell you that. And we knew going into the season, he would have a bit of a test, like trying to answer some critics, of which I'd probably include myself as a part of, or skeptics would probably be a bit more accurate, not knowing how he would fare against someone of Carlos Sainz's caliber. Carlos Sainz is not Logan Sargent. He's not Nicholas Latifi. Yet, halfway through the season, 46 points to 13, 7-5 in qualifying. Like Albon has proven that he is deserving of what is an up-and-coming seat at Williams. So, yeah, very well done to him. I've gone with a B+. Next, we have Kimi Antonelli.
Oh, you know him?
It's me.
Grande Kimi.
Little Kimi Antonelli. What are you grading Antonelli?
What am I giving Antonelli? I'm giving Antonelli a B-. Rookie treatment is in order, folks. Rookie treatment. He's only 12 races into his career, so I have been kinder to Antonelli than maybe I would be to the more, to the likes of Hamilton, who I have high expectations of. His season has been on a bit of an odd sliding scale. He was so fantastic in the first 3 races, and I really mean that. I wasn't expecting miracles from him, but I think he got a 4th, a 6th, and a 6th in his first 3 races, and that's really strong.
4th came from 17th on the grid?
Yeah, exactly. And you've got to remember that he had to deal with those conditions on his first Grand Prix. Yeah. Hadjar was in the wall, Bortoleto nowhere to be seen, drivers who are far more experienced than him. Piastri finishes behind him due to a mistake. There are reasons to be really proud of that 4th place, and I give him a lot of credit for it. He endured a lot in that Grand Prix, first Grand Prix. China, I thought, was really, really good, and Japan, really tough track, a real driver's track, and 6th place to get round there. The qualifying especially made it for him. Really, really great. Other highlights include, of course, the sprint pole position that he's had. The podium in Canada was a real highlight, but then he's had some real lows. He's in the last, how many is it here? 1, 2, 3, 4, and the last 6 Grand Prix, he's had 4 DNFs. 4 DNFs in the last 6 Grand Prix. It's not a good look, but he's a rookie. And so because he's a rookie, he does get a little bit of that allowance. The Great Britain DNF, The weather was so bad at Silverstone, go straight to the back of Hadjar. You could barely see what was coming. I don't really fully blame him for that one, that's for sure. I think some were his own fault, and they have been caused by himself. So he's not matched George Russell, and that's expected. But occasionally there's been real glimmers of speed, outright speed that we know he's got. He just needs to convert that outright speed into more consistency and race understanding, much like Piastri had to do a couple of seasons ago. Antonelli's going through that same phase. So if this was another driver who had these results, they would have had a lower score. I am giving him the rookie caveat, but a B- I think is a great start for a driver who's coming to one of the top teams. He's up against one of the top opponents in terms of George Russell. And he's got himself a podium and some really good finishes. So a B-.
Which is why I've gone with a C-. And I think, again, I'm looking at it more through the lens of how he's performed without taking the rookie status into consideration. Otherwise, it probably would be a very similar grade, because based on expectation, he would be around a B, I think, because not only is he a rookie, he's a rookie that did 1 year of F2, no years of FIA Formula 3. He essentially went from Frecker to F2 to F1 in 3 years. That doesn't happen very often, and with good reason. So it has, and going into a Mercedes as well, it's not like any other seat. Like, he's going into a seat which has provided constructors and drivers championships in the not too distant past. So very difficult challenge for him. I agree with the bright moments that you mentioned, the Australia recovery in very difficult conditions. The Miami sprint pole, I think, made everyone sort of sit up and go, okay, like, this guy is capable of hooking together a lap. The Canada podium, obviously. I think maybe my issue so far is that it may be his own fault for starting too strong, but it hasn't developed as much maybe as I thought it would. Like, it's almost the first few races were maybe a little bit more encouraging than the last few. You specified some of the DNFs. And whilst the DNFs in a few of those instances weren't his fault, Silverstone, Spain, Imola, none of them were heading very well anyway. And Monaco, he didn't DNF at Monaco, but he might as well have done. Like, his crash in qualifying, to me, like, from a grading perspective, is the equivalent of a DNF, because that cost him any chance at scoring points on the Sunday. So it's been a rough stretch for him with that one Canadian podium in the middle of it. So he'll be looking for, even if he's not on the podium again for the next 2 or 3 races, it's just getting back that consistency of what he had sort of in the first few races. Pierre Gasly, what are you rating him? Sausages out.
Yeah, now, as a little bias here from me, we all know that I'm a secret sausage fan.
Don't know how much of a secret that is.
Heck. And I think that Alpine, I think a lot of us do at this point recognize that Alpine is by far, it's a stinky car. It's poo-poo.
Big poo-poo, yeah.
It's a big poo-poo, big pink and blue poo. And it is the slowest car. So the fact that Gasly has had, he sits above Alonso in the points table at the moment. He's currently, hold on, I've got to bring it down here. Pierre Gasly is 13th, right? He's above Sainz. He's above Tsunoda. He's above Bearman. He's above Alonso. He's really beating some cars that should be well in front of him. And he's had 3 points finishes, and none of them did I feel like he scraped into those. Great Britain, he arguably shouldn't have been 6th place. He finished 6th. We should be way lower than that, I think, with the strategy that he ended up being on. Did a great job for fight the likes of Max Verstappen. I know that, of course, Max had the spin, and we're going to finish in front of him regardless. But he did a brilliant job on much longer tyres in that sense. The 8th place in Spain, that car should not be 8th place in Spain. And even when the car was a bit better at the start of the season, the 7th in Bahrain, yes, it played to the car's strengths a little bit, but what a performance he's had. DSQ'd, of course, in China, which is unfortunate, and a couple of DNFs along the way. But in that car, I'm not sure it would have made any difference. I'm not sure he'd have gone on to score fantastic points in the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, for example, or Monaco, for crying out loud. I'm not sure he was going to be up there really belting it home. The only one that really made me think, this isn't great, was Canada. That's probably the only Grand Prix that I've looked at and gone, you probably weren't as good as Colapinto, actually. It's probably the only time I've realistically looked at that, thought he had your number this weekend. But otherwise, he has really been a cut above the rest for how bad the car is. I really do think he deserves a bit better.
What was the grade, sorry, on that one?
A-.
A-, love that. I've gone with a B- for Pierre Gasly. A lot of it is just based on that car because it is not very good. And look, Alpine have 19 points and 100% of them are his. So he's doing far better than what Colapinto is doing and what Jack Doohan has done. And I really hope for his sake that we can see even a slightly better Alpine, like even last season's Alpine, where he can deliver a little bit more of the results that you said, like the Bahrain result for sure. That was a really impressive one. Silverstone, I didn't give him driver of the day at Silverstone. It is a contender for second best performance at a Grand Prix so far this year. He was phenomenal on that day. It's not been perfect. You said the Canada one where he started in the pit lane and couldn't make any progress. That's definitely up there. The tyre wear and the lack of management of the tyres in Austria was tough because he qualified so well and eventually found himself tumbling back down the order. It's not like Colapinto did a great job on the tyres, so that might be more down to the car than it is him. But I might be down a little bit for that. The other one is Monaco, because I do put the error he had with Yuki Tsunoda coming out the tunnel on Gasly, which is a shame because I actually think his pace was pretty good. Not that he would have been able to show it because, as Tsunoda proved, that strategy was not going to work out. But yeah, I think he's had a good season so far. Hopefully, for his sake, he can show it a bit more in the second half. Gabriel Bortoleto, what have you graded him?
I've been maybe a little bit harsh here. I've given Bortoleto a D. You just look at the points difference between himself and Hulkenberg. Now, I know that Hulkenberg, of course, picked up that podium, but he picked up that podium, and that's kind of the point here, that the gap is quite, giant between the two of them. I think there's 30 points at least between the two of them. Now, Bortoleto's not been bad, and this D maybe sounds like it's worse than it is, but 4 points I think he's got all season, which came in Austria, is not enough when we're now actually seeing that Hulkenberg is regularly able to finish within the points and has picked up, even if you remove the podium, he's picked up 20 points all by itself without that podium-ish, which is really strong. It shows you that Sauber is actually more competitive than we thought it was going to be. It's not the broken green toaster in the corner anymore. It's more your air fryer or microwave, I'm sure, which serves multiple purposes throughout the home. And whilst he's improved, his results have been fairly consistent. A lot of 19ths, a lot of 18ths. And they get picked up a little bit, a couple of 14ths, a 12th, and then the 8th. So a couple of DNFs, which are on him. They are his fault. Great Britain was definitely on him. Miami, I think, was also caused by him. So, it's been regularly below par in comparison to his teammate. And then he's had the one pickup, I think, in Austria, which caused him to look higher than he really has been. So it's not bad. He's not, he's driving the car at the back of the grid for the most part. It's going to be tough. But I do think that more can be taken out of this. And whilst he's a rookie, he gets a bit of grace for that. Hulkenberg has really shown what can be done. And I thought they would have been a little bit closer.
I've gone with a C- for Bortoleto. So I've gone with the same grade for him as I've gone with for Antonelli. I think it's very tough to tell Sauber versus Mercedes, but I think they've roughly impressed me as much as each other. Maybe a slightly different way of getting there, because Bortoleto, first 5 races of the season for me didn't show much. Not like Hulkenberg showed much in those first 5 either, but yeah, Bortoleto didn't show much when the car was at its worst. I think it got better as we got to Miami and Imola. I think in both of those instances, he could have scored points, if not for, and not based on what he did. He wasn't able to convert on what I thought was either a good qualifying performance or a good start to a race. Miami, I think the DNF was car related, but I struggled to remember that far back. Imola, strategically, they went the wrong way with him, which I think he was probably on course for the back end of the points there. Austria, definitely the best of the lot so far. Not perfect, because I think a more experienced driver would have been able to get Fernando Alonso, maybe even Liam Lawson, but even so, that was better than anything we'd seen. And then a tough outing at Silverstone. Certainly not the only one, but a tough outing. I think he spun 3 times that weekend. I think the overall picture between him and Hulkenberg is it's a touch better than it looks. I know it's 37-4, and I have already kissed away teammate wars this year. But in terms of race finishes, it's 8-4 to Hulkenberg, which Hulkenberg's better. that's where we're at this point in their respective careers, but that's not embarrassing. And in qualifying, they are dead level, 6-all. So there's something to work with here. And it has, I think, trended upwards as we've gone through the year.
I think with the Sauber, it's clear that the car has gotten better over the last 5 or 6 races, but Hulk's managed to achieve 4-point finishes in a row. Bortoleto's picked up 1 and only beating Hulkenberg once in those last 4. I think that's where the separation really comes through.
Yeah, certainly in the Spanish GP and the Silverstone GP, where there was Hulkenberg's done a very good job, and we'll get into it on Sunday, obviously, when we review him as well. But Hulkenberg has done a very good job of being in the right position when there has been turmoil across the top teams. And he's not the only one. There are a few others that I think we'll get to today that have benefited from that as well. And that's certainly the experience factor that Sauber would have been looking for when they hired him. Last year's champion, and increasingly looking like might not be this year's champion, Max Verstappen. What are you rating him?
I've given Max Verstappen a B+. He's driving what looks like in some Grand Prix a shopping trolley. It is struggling to get around corners. They're having to be experimental. It's clear that car is nowhere near the ability that it had last season, especially up against these McLaren boys at the moment. But I think he's finished outside the top 5 3 times this season. DNF'd 1, of course, in Austria, where he was taken out by Kimi Antonelli and likely will go finish inside the top 5 there. I mean, Bahrain was another one that he had where he was outside the top 5. And of course, the final one was Spain, where he picked up the penalty under the safety car that dropped him all the way back, basically. So it's a tough end to him for that one. So realistically, driving a car that I think is not great at all, to have multiple race victories throughout this season, to go up against both Norris and Piastri regularly, who are in a better car, who have got better hardware underneath them, and to have this many points and still be clear in 3rd place is a real credit to just how brilliant Max Verstappen is. There's a couple of performances that really stand out for me. Japan was obviously fantastic. One of the best qualifying and race performances I think that he's delivered, which is strong when you've won that many as well. And then he's put up some great performances elsewhere. I think he was fantastic in Canada. I thought he did a really, really good job. I thought his lap in Spain was actually fantastic. Of course, it was just ruined by the behavior that he had in the Grand Prix, of course. Overall, he's been a real credit to himself, and he's the shining light of that team. There's a few things that could have bumped him up. I don't appreciate the crash with George Russell, of course. I think him dropping it under safety car in Silverstone was on him. So there are a few moments like that brought him down for me.
Yeah, I've gone with an A. I nearly went with an A- because of those few errors. This would have been for me like a nailed on A, and then a few things have come into consideration in the last few Grand Prix. Weirdly, they both kind of start with losing it under the safety car, because you've got Silverstone where he drops a number of spots, but the Spanish GP, that all started with him very nearly losing it under the safety car. Now, of course, the wheel-to-wheel contact with George Russell in turn 1, I don't put on Verstappen whatsoever. No. But of course, the later incident, yeah, that's probably on Verstappen. And that's the thing that hurts his ranking the most, for sure. I've still gone with an A because I think there have been a lot of 8, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 performances so far this year. Imola Suzuka, he obviously won. He pressured for the win in Australia and Canada. He held the lead even if he wasn't close to winning in Miami and Saudi Arabia. That's half the season. So he has been in the mix where he's been able to. I think he did a pretty good job of making something out of a few bad weekends as well. I don't think the car was very good at Bahrain. And he made something of that. Monaco, somewhat as well. Weirdly, I don't think that Red Bull went very well there. And he is still the nearest challenger to McLaren. So, yeah, and also another point that we do need to make with Red Bull, they'd be on 7 points without him. So it's
Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy?
It's so stupid. So that's why I've gone with an A. Esteban Ocon, A+, and we move forward, I guess. But I'll ask you anyway.
I'm not that far off. I'm on A-. I think he's having a really, really strong season. The same as Gasly, essentially being a bit of a better car. Whilst the heart hasn't been great, I think great would be a massive compliment. He sits 10th currently in the driver standings. He's in that top half, and he's had some real shining moments. China was absolutely fantastic. That 5th place in China, I think, gets forgotten by a lot of people, just how good a drive that was from Esteban Ocon. A really brilliant performance. But he's also been mopping up points here and there, an 8th in Bahrain, a 7th in Monaco, which I think was really great. And yes, they had the help with, of course, the teammate thing or what's going on, but just gonna make it happen. 9th in Canada, 10th in Austria. Like, he's chipping away. he's chipping away. And whilst it does seem that the Haas is very topsy-turvy, where for one driver it'll work, the next driver it won't work, and that's how him and Bearman seem to be jumping to and fro. It does look like when it works for Ocon, it does work really, really well. And he's showcasing the experience that Haas needed him to when they lost Hulkenberg. Ocon maybe not as good as Hulkenberg right now, but he's definitely bringing to Haas what they need when they've got a rookie on the other side of the garage, and that is that level head, that experience, that help for the youngster. I think he's had a really, really strong season, and the Haas is right down there, I think, overall with pace, with kind of where the Sauber Racing Bull sits. I think it's in that region. So really impressed with him. I think he's been absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, given some of the howlers that Haas have had so far this year, like I said, they've had some races where they've been competitive, and then others where you just ask, what are they doing? Have they forgotten how F1 works? I've gone with a B+, so we're very similar here. Yeah, the fact that he's top 10 is quite an achievement in a car as poor as that. His qualifying consistency hasn't been great so far this year, which is why I've marked him down a little bit. He is beating his rookie teammate in all facets, so in terms of points, race finishes, qualifying as well. But similar to how I view the Bortoleto Hulkenberg situation, I actually think it's a bit closer than what the scoreline suggests. I think Bearman's been a bit unlucky, whereas Ocon has maybe had the better of the luck so far this year. He has had a few really tough outings. Imola, if you remember, he pit after the first lap because he was last and then just had no pace. And I think he ended up retiring, but honestly, I don't think anyone noticed. And then Japan, where his teammate scored a point, he wasn't able to get anywhere near the points on that day. So those are the negatives, but so many positives. China performance absolutely deserves a lot of praise. He was phenomenal that day. Bahrain, maybe even better. He came from a long way back to make they undercut quite heavy in that Grand Prix. Great tyre management. And Monaco. Yes, that came from qualifying, but hey, guess what? It's the same for everyone. If you qualify well, you've got a great chance at points. And he was the one that got it done. He got through Q1 and Q2. He's been generally pretty good at Monaco over the years, and he proved it again at Haas this year. So he's in a good spot, B+. Liam Lawson, of course, has raced for two teams so far this season, did a couple of races at Red Bull before being demoted to Racing Bulls for the remainder, for the last 10. How would you grade him?
I feel like I might have been harsh here. It's my lowest score of the lot. I've given him an E+.
The plus is almost insulting.
Yeah, when you open your paper up to see your grade, E+.
But look, Mum, it's a plus. That ain't gonna cut it.
There's a positive here, guys. Red Bull was tricky. Red Bull was really tricky for him. You look at that 12th place in China and you see some of the results that have come from Yuki, and you think 12th place wasn't actually that terrible. DNF, of course, in Australia, which wasn't ideal, and then gets swapped to Racing Bulls, where I think he's grown into the season. And I would not be shocked that if we do this again at the end of the season, if this grade is significantly improved. He is being on the wrong side of Hadjar 9 times out of 10, it feels like. It feels like every time Hadjar just slips into Q2 or just slips into Q3, Lawson is the one that just slipped out in Q1. And it's often being a 10th, 2 tenths, but there have been those moments where it's being 3 or 4 tenths, and he's had to warm back into this race. His performances have regularly gotten better. You know, he's had the 8th place in Monaco, which they executed that strategy first and brilliantly well, and that was partly on him for making that happen. I give him credit for that, for executing that. The P6 in Austria was genuinely really, really good, and he had Hadjar's number on that race. He had a really, really good Grand Prix there. That was a great step up from him. But he's just like, he competes like he's in Robot Wars. It's like he's nicknamed himself.
And you've graded him down for that?
So I kill a lot. You know, he just doesn't know when to stop going into comeback. That's right, folks. I watched the F1 movie yesterday. We're gonna get onto that on Sunday's episode. But he loves combat, and I think that is to his detriment. I think he gets himself into the wars too often. Penalties come his way too many times, or damage causes him to lose pace in the Grand Prix. I think he needs to stop it. I think he needs to get himself into racing a clean Grand Prix and just focusing on his own race. So it is an E+, but I do think in 12 races time, it could be much higher.
I'm giving Sergeant Bash a D.
Sergeant Bash.
Big up the flamethrower from Sergeant Bash that looked great and did nothing every time.
The metal was too strong. Wasn't affected by any fire.
So it's so niche, but it was so ineffective.
Big up Matilda.
Big up Matilda. Liam Lawson, gets a D. First 2 races for Red Bull, I don't even they barely factor in. It gets more mad over time, how ridiculous that decision was. Obviously, I didn't think he should be in there in the first place, but they gave him a race where it was chucking it down and a race that had 1 practice session because it was a sprint. And then they said, no, that's it.
And you know how bad that second seat is, and he still finished 12th. It's not good, but is it that dire?
So I haven't really factored those 2 races in. But the rest of it was a dodgy start. Bahrain, Miami were particularly tough. Canada more recently was also quite difficult. I think maybe in all 3 of those, he was a worst driver of the day contender, if not a winner in some of those. But there have been a few instances where it's looked more bright. Saudi Arabia, I think he was the quicker driver, even if he didn't beat Hadjar that day. Monaco, as you say, he has to execute the team strategy and still finish in the points. And Austria was by far his best race weekend so far. Qualifying is the issue. He just needs to start to beat Hadjar a little bit more consistently in the second half of the year. Lance Stroll.
I've already given my lowest score, right? We've seen that.
Okay, we know it's not lower than an E+.
No, it is a D- though. The best way to describe his season, and I'm really sorry to do this to you, Kirsty, but it's a sandwich.
Let me just timestamp that, right? 35, 11. Good.
You look at these results and you know exactly why. I'm going to be really specific with these. First 2 results, 6th, 9th. That's pretty good for Lance Stroll, especially in that Aston Martin, which at the start of this season was struggling. But then after that, last. And then 17th, 16th, 16th, 15th, 15th, 17th, 14th, and out of the blue, 7th. And arguably, he should have been higher in Great Britain. It should have been better than what it was in Silverstone. But 7th is still pretty darn solid. Still beat his teammate. That's great. Well done you, Lance Stroll. The qualifying thing is what's letting him down. When it is weird conditions, he thrives. If Formula One was only done on wet weather days, he could be the next Ayrton Senna, for all I know. He could be that good. But it's not. Most Formula One races are dry. And when it's dry, he qualifies and he gets eliminated in Q1 and he can't move forward and he's stuck in traffic and then he ends up hitting a car or having a problem. He's not DNF'd once. He's been there the whole time. That's a good improvement for Lance. But overall, it's not been a good season. But it does baffle me that he's still in front of Alonso in the points table.
That is literally my first note. How is he beating Alonso?
I don't know. I know Alonso's starting slow, but he's been so much better for the last 7 Grand Prix.
It's just, people will go, well, Lance Stroll's beating Fernando Alonso. He deserves a great. You're not watching the races. I know Lance Stroll has come up with a couple of miraculous performances so far this year, but race to race, Alonso has been considerably better. Do you remember that time where Lance Stroll out-qualified Alonso this year? No, you can't, because it hasn't happened. He doesn't do it, ever. Look, he is really good at just being in it to win it. The man is Dale Winton. Remember, babies, the lottery, and it's what he get. Yeah, go real niche here. But yeah, Australia P6 because he finished. Silverstone, he finishes P7, and honestly, he lucked into that strategy, man. And the other driver that sort of lucked into the strategy got on the podium, which is probably where Lance Stroll should have been as well. But he still gets 7th place there. The Miami sprint that was just mental. He managed to go from a Q1 elimination to 5th. He's just found his way in some of these races. But overall, if you ran this season 100 times, I think Alonso is ahead in the points by this point 98, 99% of the time. So I've gone with a D. He's got 8 finishes of 14th or worse. That is more than anyone. So, Yeah, it will sound harsh because of the points tally, but I just don't think it is.
No, 2 good performances does not make a good season.
Lando Norris in the McLaren, of course, currently second place in the championship.
Yeah, he gets an A. I think you've got to be really picky with Lando Norris's performance so far, and he's almost like a reverse mounting, if you want to draw a graphic for this, because it starts off so well. First place in Australia, even with the mistake, unreal start to the season, and then gets 2 second places. I mean, the sprint wasn't great in China, but that's the points are rather minimized there. But 2 second places, really, really good. And then it continues to decline. A third in Bahrain, and he's well off the pace of Piastri. One of his worst performances to date against his team at that point. But then he gets a 4th in Saudi Arabia, but they were really close in pace for a lot of that weekend because Piastri qualified better, and it meant that he had the better chance. And then all of a sudden, it starts to get better again. Second. The win in Monaco was a real standout performance for him. And the only real letdown that he's had is the crash in Canada, which is entirely on him, and I blame him for. But he bounced back brilliantly with a win in Austria, where I think he totally deserved it and held the pressure off. And okay, he got, I'm going to put this politely, slightly lucky with the way that things played out for him, in the sense that Piastri made that mistake under safety car to pick up the penalty. He never had the pace outright to win that Grand Prix. He was never in front on track, never made the move on track, never looked like he was going to beat Piastri on track. That's Formula One. Luck goes your way sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. And we've seen that up and down the season. I do think that Piastri's had a slightly more negative turn of events overall in terms of some luck, but that's only marginal. But overall, he's been great, really impressive. There's some mistakes in there. Qualifying is the main one that he needs to improve. And I'm going to take the Canada crash with a pinch of salt. He's still in this title hunt. He's so close behind. Really, really impressed. Really, really impressed. Okay.
A- for me. I think the races have been an A, and then the qualifying, I've just knocked him down to an A-. Canada's obviously the obvious worst point of the season so far, but if you look at the other races, and that's 11 of them, I don't know what the second worst race is. Sure, Saudi Arabia, 4th place wasn't brilliant. Bahrain, 3rd place wasn't brilliant. But we're not talking about 10th and for 13th place finishes here. We're talking about podiums or near podiums, and they might be his worst races of the year. He has been consistently very strong all year. When he is on it, he is on it. Like Australia, Austria, Monaco, especially at Monaco, he never looked in any jeopardy at all, to the point where he was setting the fastest lap of the Grand Prix on the final lap of that race. When he turns up to a weekend and everything clicks, he is very difficult to stop. It's really qualifying that there's the only thing that's letting him down at this point. He does have that DNF, but being only single digits away from the championship lead, people want to tell me he's had an awful season. It's not true. He has been great most of the time, with just a few small errors here and there. Some heavy hitters still to come, and we start with one of those, the 4th place driver in the Drivers' Championship. That is George Russell. What are you grading him?
Russell was one of the easiest ones on this whole list for me. I've gone straight in with an A. That Mercedes is nowhere near the quality of the McLaren. I think that it has struggled in a few of those races, and whilst he started well, I do think there have been some challenges that have arisen. But I've got one line next to George Russell's name, A ranking, only 3 races outside the top 5, which I think is... the consistency there is just mind-blowingly good. He is showing, even with all the speculation around Verstappen maybe going to Mercedes, should it be Antonelli and Verstappen? What would Russell do? Should he be kicked out of the team? That he is such a top-quality driver. And I think we call him the burglar for a reason, because much like Charles Leclerc in some seasons with that Ferrari, I don't think that Mercedes should regularly be appearing in the podium, 4th places, 5th places, as much as it does. And Russell, I think, is really delivering a fantastic season. He's had a real continuation on from when he was up against Lewis Hamilton. He now runs that team, I think, internally. I'm really impressed with how this season's gone. So I've given him a big fat A.
Agreed. A.
We love that.
I think he has displayed excellent consistency so far this year. And you say he's only been outside the top 5 on 3 occasions. I'm not saying those 3 were all perfect races from George Russell, but I think strategy led him to finish outside the top 5 on all 3.
One was Monaco, right? And he had to start outside the top 10 anyway, due to a failure in his car.
Yeah, Monaco, I don't hold against him whatsoever. I maintain that anyone in his position, including the McLarens, including Max Verstappen, the Ferraris, anyone in his position would not have scored points that day because strategically, in terms of overtaking at Monaco being so difficult, and strategically the V-Carb and Williams teams playing those games, I don't think anyone would have got back into the points. So I don't blame him for that. Silverstone, whilst that wasn't a perfect race from Russell, strategically driven with that early call to go onto the dry tyres. And then Imola as well. He was on the same strategy or a very similar strategy to Charles Leclerc. And we know that wasn't the right call. It was far better to be on the Hamilton, Norris, Verstappen strategy that day. So in all three instances, you can say it wasn't outright because of George Russell. And I actually looked at, if you were to remove his two worst finishes, Silverstone and Monaco, his average finish is 3.8 so far this year.
It's crazy. It's crazy good.
It's incredible consistency. Canada's obviously the highlight. I think holding off Lando Norris at Bahrain is another one I would throw in there. He's been the non-McLaren winner of China and Miami. And he's been excellent against his teammate. I believe he's 12 out of 12 against Antonelli so far this year,
he is.
Which if you look at, I know you can say, well, Antonelli's a rookie. You would expect that. Well, if you look at others like Hulkenberg against Bortoleto or Ocon against Bearman, the experienced driver is winning. But in both of those instances, it's 8 out of 12. So they aren't doing the same absolute annihilation that what George Russell has been doing. So a few tougher runs that you mentioned prevent this from being an A+, but an easy A for me. A fellow Brit coming up next, Ollie Bearman.
The Bearman. Which I'm sure is what he says when he crosses the line.
I hope not. Actually, I hope he does.
I hope he really does.
Ciao.
Yes, the Bearman. I've given him a C+. I think that he has held himself well. He's giving himself a good account coming to Formula One for the first full season. Of course, we saw him do a substitute appearance a couple of times the season before, but in his first full season, I think he's done good. A good job. He's had 1 points finish. And in my mind, I thought it was more when I went back and did my research on the season. I thought that he had appeared, because he'd finished in 11th place 3 times. Yeah. I thought, he's definitely bringing the points more. Qualifying I think is what's letting him down. Seemingly where the Haas is actually well performing and where Ocon is going to score really good points, Bearman is regularly being knocked out in Q1, and that tends to be what's letting him down. But his race pace, for the most part, seems really solid. Seems like he's got good consistency. His race management is strong, which is what we like to see early on. But I want to make sure that his quality, his one-lap pace is what's improving, because I do think, much like Tsunoda, who we have later on in this season, series, whatever we're doing, the rankings, it's stopping him from progressing. Same as what Lawson had as well. Lawson was stopped showing a lot of point scoring positions because he was qualifying poorly. And I actually think Bearman, if he moved up even an average of 3 places in qualifying each time, he would most likely be finishing maybe a 9th instead of an 11th, a 10th instead of 11th. There's a real chance there that he's able to have, it's only maybe 4 or 5 extra points to his name, but finishing 10th 3 times in a row rather than 11th is a real credit to a rookie in a season, especially in a half like that. So I've given him a C+. I don't think he's been embarrassing against Ocon at all. I think he's had some real stellar performances. But overall, I do think Ocon, and in that half where it's a bit topsy-turvy, has had the better of it this season.
I'm just copying your answers at this point. C+. There have been some underrated performances, I think, from Bearman so far this year. I often go back to the 10th place he got at the Japanese GP, which doesn't sound like much, but on that day, I don't think the Haas was anywhere near capable or should have been near the points, and yet he was. And that was another one of those days where the top guys just didn't retire. And he's there in 10th. If he gets a slightly different race where a few of the top guys go out, that turns into an 8th or a 7th, and that probably doubles his points haul for the season so far. You're right, he's been 11th 3 times, he's been 12th once, he's been 13th once as well. Like, he's been on the cusp of points more often than not, which is why I think his points tally is maybe slightly misleading. You're also right in terms of the weaknesses and where he needs to improve. It is qualifying. There have been errors. He's crashed the car a few times. The consistency in qualifying hasn't been there. He's been on the back 2 rows of the grid 6 times, so in half of the races so far this year. But he does have a saving grace in that so has Ocon. Ocon has also been on the back two roads of the grid 6 times this season. And we know Ocon is far more experienced, has far more pedigree when it comes to qualifying in this sport against some high-profile teammates, which leads me to believe it's probably more Haas-driven than it is Bearman-driven. But it is still something he needs to improve on. Like you say, if he can up his average grid spot by even a couple, that's going to give him... His race pace is already pretty good. So that will give him enough, I think, to start getting some more regular points. It's been a while since he scored his last one. Nico Hulkenberg staying in the midfield, and I deliberately say midfield because it's not back of the grid anymore for this Sauber and this season for Nico Hulkenberg. He's managed to find his way into the top 10 in the championship standings. Very good run as of late, Sam. What's your grading for him?
Yeah, I think that line there was really crucial. Very good run as of late. I think there is a real chance here. I'm sorry to everyone that's screaming at their radios or if you're watching on YouTube, A-stars. Obviously, I don't think it's an A-star. I think it's an A. I've given him an A. I still think he's been fantastic this season, but I don't think it's, 10 out of 10 full marks. 10 out of 10 full marks will being the annihilation of your teammate like George Russell did to Antonelli. He hasn't. Bortoleto has on in some instances been very competitive alongside Nico Hulkenberg. And I do think there are occasions where he has been outdriven by Bortoleto. It's not often, but that does drop you from the top score down to the second top score. That last run, though, the 5th in Spain, the 8th in Canada, the 9th in Austria, and then the podium in Great Britain were phenomenal. And that is all topped off by the fact that he took advantage of quite a crazy Grand Prix in Australia to pick up that 7th place. But I do think his results follow the trend of the Sauber improving. Because you look at what was going on earlier on in the season, a 15th, a 16th, when ignore the disqualification from Bahrain, a 15th, a 14th, 12th, which is a good performance that he had in Imola, and then the 16th again when we're back in Monaco. Of course, tough to overtake there. It felt like he was stuck in a certain part of that race. So he was doing well. He was regularly beating the back markers. He wasn't DNFing. He wasn't getting caught up in the drama. And that's what you expect of someone of Nico Hulkenberg's experience, to be able to navigate the dramas of the back end of that field. And the moment that car is picked up, he has improved. Now, I think he's outdriven the car because I think that 5th in Spain was miraculous. The way he beat Lewis Hamilton, for example, was spectacular, taking advantage of that safety car, but the safety car played him into it. He'd have had a good result anyway. A points finish was on the cards, but that 5th was improved by what he was able to do with that safety car restart. Great Britain, of course, I think he could have had a good result. I think the podium was on because of what happened with the crazy weather and what happened with so many drivers around him, but still he was the one that got to that podium. So he has been fantastic, but I do think there's a couple of little instances where he has been helped along his way, or maybe some results further back have maybe masked just how good a season this has been. But it's a solid 9 out of 10 season so far for me. I've
gone with an A-. I think the last 4 races that you detailed there, the Spanish GP, Canadian, Austrian, and British GPs, I think it's the best 4-race stretch of any driver so far this year in a row.
I could buy it.
It has been exceptional. And even if you take away, it's a 5th, an 8th, and 2 9th, a 9th and a 3rd. But even if you take away like the actual finishing position and just work out where has he finished in and amongst the midfield, you take out the top 4 teams, and I appreciate he has beaten some of those drivers in these races, but take those out of the equation. It's a midfield win, P2, P4 win. That's an excellent run for a Sauber, which I appreciate has improved, but he started on the back of the grid in 2 of those 4 races as well. So it has been an exceptional one. Spanish GP I thought was brilliant. The overtake on Lewis Hamilton was great, but he was excellent before that. Canada, he had to make a lot of overtakes in order to make that strategy work. And then obviously Austria and Silverstone, he's had to come from a long way back to score points. And in the case of Silverstone, a lot of points. Before that, it was a lot of, okay, the car isn't able to really give him much more than what he delivered. There were a few poor races in there. I thought the Chinese GP was not great, but it's slim pickings on that front. So yeah, A-. Yuki Tsunoda's up next.
Yuki. The man I wish to give an A-star. I wish I could. Can we say A-star or A+?
Oh, that's interesting. I was going to go A+, but
it's very American, the A+.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
We do A-stars here. I don't think we do that either. We do numbers now, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
The kids.
Honestly. What are we doing in the education system with these numbers?
What is a 9? Why is a top scorer 9? What does that mean? Anyway, sorry, that's a different rant for another time. What am I giving Yuki? I'm giving him a D+. I wish I could give him an A+, because I think he's been through difficulty. And I think Isaac Hadjar is doing what Yuki Tsunoda would have wanted to have done this season, and Yuki hasn't had the chance. First 2 races in the Racing Bull was fine, perfectly fine. Of course, Hadjar crashes out in the formation lap, so he hasn't really got anyone to go against him in Australia, but he does relatively well. It's fine. And then China comes around and he's then immediately removed from that seat, and he doesn't get the chance to bed himself in. He doesn't get the chance to show what he's able to do against a rookie teammate. And then he's only had 3 points finishes in this season so far. 2 of them were 10th places. The 9th place in Bahrain, seemingly his best performance, and the one that he was far closest to Max Verstappen in, because obviously Verstappen was struggling.
Well, when Verstappen had one of his worst results is when Tsunoda's had one of his best.
Which maybe tells you that the setup of the car was what causes it to be so different. The issue is, I do think there are some pace problems there as well. I think that you look at how Perez was struggling in that car, whilst he would go out in a Q1 or he would go out in a Q2 with Perez, he still regularly finds himself back to a P8, a P7. It would happen quite regularly that he'd get himself to okay points. Not good enough for a team like Red Bull, but points. Yuki isn't doing that. Now the field is closer. I do think it's a far more competitive field this year. I think the rookies are a real step up this year. You can tell just in qualifying just how close it is, but Yuki isn't progressing in a way that I thought he would, especially at a lot of tracks where overtaking is possible and that Red Bull is the better car. He has been driving well. He's barely had a DNF all season. Let me look at my stats. He's had 1 DNF all season. That was Saudi Arabia, which is great. It shows that he's staying out of trouble, which previously was a problem for him. He would cause some crashes. He'd be involved in a lot of melee around the racetrack. He's not this time, but the raw pace isn't there. And I would love to take him out and put him in a car that suits him to see if the development he had over the last 4.5 seasons is true and he actually can be competitive, or if it is purely this second seat Red Bull issue that we've been talking about so long.
I've gone with a D. It's his best 2 races so far this year have been his first 2, and I can't think what possibly connects those 2 races that doesn't connect the other ones.
What's the mitigating factor here?
Yeah, you say if he was at Racing Bulls, he would be doing, or would be hoping to do a similar job to what Hadjar has done. I've little doubt he would be. But he's not. He's in the Red Bull and he's struggling a lot. The Saudi Arabia crash on lap 1 obviously wasn't great, but the annoying thing, I think, from his side and from anyone who wants to see a competitive second Red Bull seat, the annoying thing is how it's not getting better, it's getting worse. Like when he joined Red Bull, it wasn't perfect, but he was on the fringe of points. He did score that 9th in Bahrain. He had a couple of 10th place finishes. He had points in 3 of 4 races, and the one he didn't was that Saudi Arabian DNF, where he started inside the top 10, I think, just about. So he probably would have scored points there as well. But it's got way worse. Like, you look at Monaco, his qualifying just made any progress impossible there. Spanish GP, Austrian GP, he's starting from the very back of the grid and he's trying to fight.
Austria is the worst one.
Austria is the worst one. Yeah, I would agree with that. He's trying to recover from poor qualifying results and he just doesn't have the pace advantage on the midfield to do that. I don't think it's a massive deficit to the others that he's fighting, but he's starting too far back. If he was able to get back into a string of Q3 results, he might start to get some points results again. But his 6 straight appearances without making Q3 now, and that was after making Q3 in 3 of his first 4. So that's got to be the concerning thing for him and for Red Bull, is that not only is it not great, it's probably getting worse.
Yeah, you don't want that really. You'd like to think he's at least growing to the seat, and we've got a lot of hope for Yuki, but he's just not delivering on that right now.
Fernando Alonso.
Yeah, Fernando Alonso. I've given Fernando, I was teetering on this one. I went C+ in the end, but I can understand if maybe someone has slipped into the Bs. If you compare himself and Stroll, which it feels like with this Aston Martin is something you have to do with teammates because the car has been quite bizarre throughout the season. The first 2 races where Lance Stroll scored pretty much his best points throughout the season until we got to Silverstone, Alonso didn't finish. And both of those instances, car breaking down, troubles, caught up, whatever. It meant that both opportunities where the car could clearly score points, or it was involved in such a chaotic Grand Prix that the car was able to be in the points anyway. Alonso was unable to fight there. And I don't really blame him for those DNFs. So I've struggled to take that away from him. But then the results weren't too dissimilar to what Lance Stroll was doing anyway in this midfield section of the season we've had so far, where the car wasn't great, but like where Alonso would finish 11th, 15th, a couple of 15th. I think his results are quite patternless. I think it goes 11, 15, 11, 15, 11, something like that. Lance Stroll isn't too far behind. I think he's regularly kind of 14th, 16th, that kind of thing. It shows that Alonso has the upper hand. Alonso is better. It's only in the last 4 Grand Prix that I've thought, finally, Alonso is showing Alonso. We're really starting to see him do this now. And, you know, the 9th place in Spain, the 2 7th places in a row in Austria and Canada were great. The car is starting to improve clearly. I expected more in GB. I know his strategy was bad. But he is savvy enough. He is strategically minded. He's got the experience. I thought that whilst he only just lost to his teammate, which is hilarious, so it was that close anyway, I thought he should have been the guy fighting further up, and it just didn't play out that way because of strategy a lot of the time. So yeah, I've gone C+, but I really will accept a higher score if you've got the reasons for it, because I think that easily it could be a B. You know, that's it. It could be that easy.
I've gone B-. I nearly went to a B, but I went down to a B- just because of a few of those errors. The off that he had at the Spanish GP, Australia, and how he crashed out there, that meant I couldn't go too much higher than a B-. But where I've elevated him a little bit is just based on, I think, whilst he scored points in the last 4 races, there were quite a few races before that where I think he deserved points, and either the car wasn't quite performing as it could have done, or he got unlucky. So Monaco, I think he deserved not only points, but good points there based on where he qualified. Car let him down. Imola, strategically, he was let down there. He qualified well inside the top 10. So did Stroll, to be fair. But like, I think he deserved points. He made the most of it as well, but 11th place there. And I think there were a few earlier performances in the season that were pretty good, just in a car that wasn't quite strong enough. The Saudi Arabian GP and the Japanese GP immediately spring to mind, but it's turning around for him. 5 of the last 6 races, he's been in Q3. I think if the car continues on this trajectory, he'll be in the points regularly in the second half of this season. So, it's getting better for him. We've done 15, 5 more to go, Sam, and we'll start off this final segment of grading with Charles Leclerc.
Yes, Chocolate Leclerc, the man that doesn't melt under pressure. I've given him a B+. Charles Leclerc has been the George Russell. I know that sounds like a really strange set of words.
The George Russell.
The George Russell. He shouldn't be there in many instances. He's been outside the points once, and that was in Silverstone. That was a howler, absolute stinker of a Grand Prix from Charles Leclerc. Now, I know that Ferrari is not good in the wet, but he's beaten Lewis Hamilton, 10 out of the 12 Grand Prix, something like that. That was the race that Lewis Hamilton showed why he's still in the Ferrari, where he's still competing, because whilst Hamilton looked like he struggled a little bit, the fact that he was 4th and the chance for a podium maybe in a few laps' time may have come around, Leclerc was barely ever in the chance for points. And I know that he made the wrong call strategically, but unlike Russell, who regularly improved and got himself back into fighting for points and was regularly there with Hamilton at many occasions, Leclerc just had issue after issue after issue. Just got worse and worse and worse for him. But other than that, he's had 4 sneaky podiums. He has been beating Hamilton one other time. I think that was Imola. Again, he's on the wrong strategy at that point. The sprint race didn't go to plan for him, but it's a sprint race. So realistically, I don't know too much more what he could do other than the couple of mistakes that I've highlighted. So it's a really, really solid season. And I think Ferrari, again, give him a car that this man deserves. Please free him.
I've gone with an A-. I might have gone to an A without the Silverstone debacle, but the rest of the season has been very good. And, you know, it hasn't been, from Ferrari's position, a very strong season. So it's harder to properly judge him alongside the elite of the sport this year. But when I went through the races, I was like, well, there's not too much here to pick out. Like, he has had 4 podiums. Good start. He beat a McLaren in Saudi Arabia in one of those podiums. He beat a McLaren in Monaco for another one. And he was the best driver after the 2 McLarens in both the Spanish and the Austrian GPs. And then I looked at a few others. Japanese GP, I think he probably maximised that Grand Prix. Bahrain strategy hurt him a little bit. The safety car came out at the wrong time for Ferrari, but still, I think he maximized that. Imola strategically not on the right side of things, but was the best on that strategy. So I think there's 7 races there. That's over half the season where I think he's probably got the most out of a race. I think that's deserving of an A-. Franco Colapinto, I don't think, and I could be wrong, I don't think I am, I don't think he's going to be scoring an A-. What have you scored Franco Colapinto?
You're right. It's like A+. Thank you, Argentina. Yes. Subscribe. Yeah, it's a game with D, which is a little bit different than the alphabet. So obviously we've got to judge him on the 6th Grand Prix here, and it's tricky to do so. But he's not had the most glowing 6th Grand Prix. He's not coming and set the world alight like we thought he might do when he was at Williams for those kind of 6, 7 Grand Prix that he stepped in for the first time round. He hasn't finished above 13th place in that entire 6th Grand Prix that he's had. And Gasly at that point has had 2 points finishes in the time that they've been together. Now, Gasly is far more experienced. He's a far more well-rounded driver. But the gap between them has been far larger than I expected. The real nail in the coffin for me in this was the removal of himself from the Silverstone Grand Prix due to his mistake that he made in the qualifying. That is a real low light for him. That's a bit embarrassing for a racing driver, that the collision that they made either was so bad that the car couldn't be repaired in time. And we've seen some repair jobs in Formula One. They've turned cars around faster than that. Or they were so worried about his performance in qualifying, and you know what Flavio's like, that they just decided that it wasn't worth the damage to send him out again and risk anything. And that shows a real lack of faith. It shows a real lack of performance. His best performance has been Canada, I think, overall. And even then, he dropped back significantly. And I think Gasly had troubles with his car, so it made the gap look even worse. It's just not been the glowing resume that we thought it might have been when he came back into Formula One and replaced Jack Doohan. And you have to slightly think, maybe Jack Doohan could have done with a little bit more time. Maybe 6 races to judge people isn't a fair amount of time, and that they deserve a little bit more time to shine. So yeah, I feel like a D could be viewed as harsh, but I can only give what I've given on the track despite it only being 6 races.
Yeah, I've gone with a D as well, but it is incomplete. He missed the first term of school, did Franco Colapinto. Correct. So it's a far tougher grade, and much like Jack Doohan, who we're not grading today because he's not active, but he probably would have got a D as well. It's difficult. They do deserve more races than what they're getting in that seat. Canada was the best of the lot. You're absolutely right. He has been in Q2 on 3 of the 6 races so far, which is encouraging. The problem is you then compare it to Gasly, who's been in Q3 on 4 of the 6 races they've been teammates.
That's so good. Sorry, that's so good in that Alpine.
Yeah. And I think that Alpine is genuinely getting somewhere. And Colapinto's just not able to show that right now. He's been nowhere in a few of those races. The Spanish GP might have been the worst one. But again, it was so early on in his tenure in the Alpine that it's tough to criticize him too much, but we can only grade what's in front of us.
Yeah, agreed.
Isaac Hadjar, the Rizzler.
The Rizzler. He gets a big B for boom.
Of course.
We bring the boom. Now, if you are, I don't know, older than the age of probably about 18 years old, and you've got sad like us 3 on this show, you probably have no idea what the Rizzler is. And you know what? I respect you for not knowing. And you're like, why do I always say boom when he does well?
Well,
just get used to it, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a B for Hadjar. And I think that he's regularly in the points because of his Saturday performances. He has been able to do what Lawson isn't able to do, and that is where the cutoff line is. One of them sits on one side, and the other sits on the bad side, the relegation side. And Lawson is so regularly finding himself in that 17th, 18th drop-off where Hadjar will sneak through by a 10th or so. Then Hadjar does something that you don't expect. You think, all right, it's currently going to be 15th, maybe 14th. He'll elevate himself, and suddenly he'll be 9th, 8th. We've seen him higher than that as well. You know, he is regularly Q3ing in qualifying, which is, a new adjective, folks. Are you Q3ing today? I'm going to Q3 to new turn of phrase.
I don't like it.
You don't like anything I say, so that makes sense.
Fair, yeah.
So I think his qualifying has been sensational, which means that his race pace is allowed to just be consistent. He's out of the trouble. He hasn't got to get through cars around him that might be slower. And I don't think that Racing Bull's car is actually consistently that quick. So I do think he's elevating it. It means he's finishing higher than maybe the car would allow him. And Lawson can't join him up there because the car hasn't got the pace to cut through the crowd that are around him. The DNS that he had in the formation lap in Australia was a low point. I think even for a rookie, I know it's tough weather. it was only him that did it. And you could tell on his face. We've seen it. We've been through it. The emotions that he went through. He was gutted. I get why he was gutted, but it was a kind of a blemish on his record. And he's only had one DNF overall in the season as well. So I think that shows you that he is able to stay out of the damage, the melee, the issues that Lawson is regularly finding himself in as his teammate. And I think he would have held his own quite comfortably against Yuki Tsunoda this season had they been teammates in that Racing Bulls team. So yeah, a B. I would almost have stretched to a B+. I really think he's been fantastic. There's been a couple of races where he has been beaten by Lawson or has just been trapped and hasn't been able to get out, and that's why I've dropped him down.
I'm going with a B-. That's not very boom behaviour.
That's quite doom.
Doom, yeah. Yeah, there's just... when it's gone bad for Hadjar this year, it's gone properly bad. Like the Australian GP, the Canadian GP really struggled there. Silverstone last time out. So that maybe knocks him down a little bit. But there have been a lot of great performances. Japanese GP, he was the best midfielder. Sort of Saudi Arabia to Spain, that stretch of races was absolutely brilliant. Monaco P6, Spain P7, Imola P9, but might have been even better. He had quite a mistimed safety car on that one where I think they elected to pit. But otherwise, he might have been 7th or so there as well. Qualifying has absolutely been the highlight. He's 8th in terms of average qualifying position on the grid so far this year. He's been 6 times to Q2, 6 times to Q3. He hasn't been knocked out in Q1 once. And his average starting position is 10th. That's very, very good in a Racing Bulls car. And the last thing I want to say on Hadjar is, you mentioned like when he's got through to Q3, he's had no P10 starts, which sounds like a weird compliment, but whenever he's got through to Q3, he's then made something of it as well. Yeah. If you look at Gasly and Albon, they've both made Q3 once more than Hadjar. They've both made Q3 7 times this year. But on 3 of those occasions each, they've started 10th. Hadjar in all 6 occasions has at least got to 9th, and in a few other instances has got even higher up the grid. That's great stuff to make something of it when you're there. So yeah, B- from me. Carlos Sainz. What are you saying for him?
Carlos Sainz, a smooth operator. Sorry, Carlos. You get a C- for me. Which maybe it's harsh, but it's when I judged him up against Albon, that's where his score came down. Because when you look at his season, he's actually only been outside the points 3 times when he's actually finished a race. He's had the did not start in, was it Austria, where he didn't was able to get away. The car failed. But it is the fact that he's been failing against Albon. Now, he does get a little bit of grace that at the start of the season, he is one of those drivers, of course, that went to a new team, had to bed in a little bit. It happens. But I did expect Sainz to bounce back a little bit stronger. But when he is finishing, when he is at a place where the car is actually able to perform, ignoring all your likes of Spain, for example, he's doing well. He's scoring in the points. It's just not far enough in the points where Albon is usually in front of him, and that's the problem. Where Albon was regularly scoring 5th places and 6th places, Sainz was sitting 9th. Sainz was sitting 10th. Now, this is strong. It's great for the team. But when your teammate is able to do that, I can't grade you as highly as what I was grading his teammate. So Sainz is having just a good season. He's got some lowlights, he's got some highlights, but overall, it's a good season. I don't have too much to say to him because I do feel like where it's gone bad, it's not fully his fault, but when it's gone well, it hasn't been incredible where it's gone well. So he just sits in the middle for me.
Yeah, which is why I've gone for a C. It's been okay, maybe slightly underperforming versus what I thought he might do, but he has also been quite unlucky so far this year. That's definitely been a factor. It's also been a case of the Williams has not been as strong the last, almost the second quarter of the season versus the first quarter of the season, I would say, which hasn't aligned with when Carlos Sainz has kind of been at his best. He did have, when he started to get better, which I would say was Bahrain to Imola, because in that 4-race stretch, he qualified 8th, 6th, 6th. And he didn't convert on a few of those. Not all of them were his fault. Like Imola, for example, he was one of those drivers that went the wrong way on strategy. But it felt like as soon as he was starting to get to grips with that car around that period of time, that's when it turned and the Williams started to become a bit more difficult again. Now that doesn't exonerate him because he has had a few Q1 exits so far this season, which have been poor. But I'd like to see if that Williams can get a little bit more competitive again, could Carlos Sainz make something of it? Because I think he might be in a better position to do so versus the beginning of this year. And we round out our rankings with the guy who's currently leading the way, Oscar Piastri. What's you grading for him?
I think it's like you've planned this, that the person that people are most interested in is at the end of the list. Well done.
Keep him on the line, folks.
That's called customer retention. That is. I played you like a fiddle, listeners. No, please stay. What have I given Oscar Piastri? I'll give him an A. It was a very, very high A, almost an A+. He's on that cutoff, unfortunately for him. He's had 2 performances all season where he's been outside the podium, which is a sensational turnaround from Oscar Piastri. The first, of course, in Australia, where he finished 9th, and that was because of that massive mistake, which Lando Norris made the same mistake and recovered better. As simple as that, really. It meant that Lando Norris went on to lead the championship after race 1, and he walked away with 2 points. And yet we get to the halfway point of the season, and he leads the championship by single-digit figures, which shows an incredible turnaround and a great run of form between China and Miami, where he won every single race, bar Japan, where he was 3rd. And we know what happened in Japan. It was all about qualifying. And usually qualifying has been his strength. It's his consistency. It means that he's very rarely away from the top 3 to start the Grand Prix, which means that he can recover if anything has gone wrong. The negative, of course, is Canada, where his teammates started behind him. And actually, whilst he should have capitalised further, while he should have been in contention for that race win, the pace wasn't there for him that day. But he holds off his teammate, and his teammate makes a mistake and crashes into the back of him. So whilst it was a downbeat for him, it was a much bigger blow for his teammate. The one I want to call out, actually, which stood out to me as maybe his worst result in terms of just pure pace against his teammate overall, I think was Monaco. In qualifying, he was never touching Lando Norris. He never had the chance due to consistency, due to ability to extract the pace out there. And then in the Grand Prix, now I've watched some highlights back of it. It's almost a miracle he finishes that Grand Prix because he is millimeters away from the wall where he's not in full control of that car on numerous occasions. So I don't know if that is just incredible skill on Oscar Piastri's part or just, I don't know, blind luck. And sure, you get a bit of both in F1 and you need it to be there, so fair play to him. But I'm really having to nitpick. I really am, to make sure that he's being held back by something that he hasn't had the perfect season. The ability that he showed in Bahrain was sensational. The race management in Spain was absolutely incredible. The pace he pulled out in the wet in Silverstone was unreal. And then he was held back, of course, by 2 safety cars, and he made the mistake under the safety car that caused him the penalty that then resulted in him losing the race. That's on him. Austria, harrowing Norris around for so long. I would have liked he made that mistake where, of course, he didn't keep the lead. I would have liked to have seen him held on to that, which I think was on him. But it's really difficult to find proper faults. And that's why he's a really strong A for me.
Yeah, I've gone with an A as well. If there was such a grade as an A+-, he probably would have got that. But yeah, he's not the only driver I've given an A, but he's at the top of those A's. It's just not many errors so far this year. That's why he's leading the championship. I think he's deserved all 5 of the wins that he's got. I don't think any of those have been dubious. And when you look through the 6 races where Lando Norris has beaten Oscar Piastri, you've got Monaco. Sure that he was off the pace there versus his teammate. Austria, it was competitive, but I'll still give Lando Norris the advantage. But then you look at the other 4. Australia, Japan, Imola, Silverstone. I don't think Norris is outpacing him on any of those occasions, really. Australia was nip and tuck until the error from Piastri. Japanese GP, they are next to each other, right behind Max Verstappen. Imola, Norris beats Piastri, but Piastri has the worst strategy to contend with. And Silverstone, Piastri led the way until the penalty. So I think in all 4 of those instances where Lando Norris has won, you could say the primary reason why Norris has won is not he was just quicker than his teammate. So there's plenty to be optimistic about for him.